Historicamente, períodos de rápido avanço, mudanças drásticas e quebras de paradigma deram início a tempos de grande incerteza, instabilidade e muitas perguntas sem respostas. A quarta revolução industrial que vivemos hoje comprova este fato, e dessa vez, a força motriz por trás das grandes mudanças é a inteligência artificial. A IA assumiu um papel central em todas as áreas de nossas vidas. O futuro que projetamos se tornou o aqui e o agora. No trabalho, ela potencializa nossas habilidades e nos torna cada vez mais ágeis e inovadores. Na área da saúde, ajuda a identificar padrões e prever o risco de doenças. Na economia, impulsiona a criação de novos empregos e eleva o PIB de muitos países. Mas todas elas precisam de um fio condutor para se tornarem mais inteligentes e proveitosas: a mente, o raciocínio e a emocionalidade humana. Nenhuma IA tem a capacidade de pensar e tomar decisões por nós, mas concedemos a ela o poder de hackear a nossa atenção o tempo todo. E passar horas conectado não nos permite pensar direito, refletir e, o mais importante de tudo, sentir. Sentir o ar, sentir a respiração, sentir a emoção de cada momento. Quantas vezes ao dia você utiliza a IA como ferramenta de distração? É definitivo. A inteligência artificial faz parte do nosso dia a dia, mas precisamos do autoconhecimento para abraçar com mais leveza essa complexidade que é o futuro que vivemos no agora. Vamos juntos encontrar este equilíbrio? Sejam muito bem-vindos à quinta semana Fellipelli de Neurociência e Inteligência Emocional. Tudo que é humano nos interessa.
Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais uma semana de Neurociência e Inteligência Emocional. É com imensa alegria que a gente está aqui pela quinta vez nessa edição e que nos reunimos com muito carinho para compartilhar as mais recentes descobertas e insights relacionados a estes temas tão atuais. Eu sou Adriana Fellipelli, CEO da Fellipelli, mas certamente eu não estou aqui sozinha. Nessa empreitada, tem uma equipe enorme por trás dos nossos bastidores, muito trabalho, e também estou aqui online com a Alessandra Oliveira. Oi, Ale, tudo bem? Fica à vontade aí para entrar.
Oi, Dri, boa noite, tudo bem por aqui? Espero que todos estejam muito bem, acomodados para a gente começar a nossa quinta edição da Semana Fellipelli de Neurociência e Inteligência Emocional. E é um imenso prazer estar aqui com você e com todos que estão ao vivo aqui conosco. Como você falou, eu sou a Alessandra Oliveira, eu sou Head Técnica e Comercial aqui na Fellipelli, contribuo com a criação e desenvolvimento de programas e soluções com muita paixão por essas áreas, buscando sempre as melhores possibilidades para os nossos clientes. Como a Adriana falou, essa edição é muito especial, pois num período de tantos avanços e novidades tecnológicas, trouxemos como pano de fundo dessa edição a inteligência artificial versus a inteligência emocional. E como a neurociência explica estímulos do nosso cérebro diante de tanta novidade, não é mesmo? E quem tem acompanhado nossas postagens sobre esse evento sabe que durante esses 3 dias teremos palestrantes incríveis e já daremos uma visão geral da programação do evento para vocês. Mas antes, coloquem aqui no chat se vocês estão ouvindo bem a gente, já contem para a gente de onde vocês estão nos acompanhando. Então, isso é super legal para a gente se aproximar um pouquinho de vocês aqui também.
Muito bom. Bom, a gente criou esse evento com base em neurociência há 5 anos atrás, né? O nosso primeiro evento foi em 2019, foi presencial, e desde então, por causa da pandemia, nós tornamos ele virtual e continuamos ele virtual. Quem sabe o ano que vem a gente faz presencial e vê a carinha de todos vocês. Mas a nossa intenção é de tornar esse evento um marco educativo, né? Por que a gente quer tornar esse marco educativo? Porque ele está relacionado diretamente com o propósito da Fellipelli. Porque, como diz o slogan, né, que apareceu no nosso filme, que é tudo que é humano nos interessa. E nessa medida é que a gente compartilha conhecimento, a gente aumenta a nossa consciência, a necessidade que nós temos do autodesenvolvimento de cada um de nós e, consequentemente, das nossas empresas. A gente entende que a compreensão do funcionamento das emoções e do cérebro com fundamentos da neurociência vai ajudar todas as pessoas de uma forma mais equilibrada a conviver tanto com a vida pessoal quanto profissional, mantendo a saúde mental e bem-estar. Então, nós da Fellipelli, nós temos o compromisso de trazer principais inovações que podem gerar impacto positivo na vida das pessoas e no aprimoramento das habilidades humanas. Então, estamos constantemente atualizando sobre as nossas tendências dentro da ciência de neurociência, né? Com o objetivo de incorporar estes conhecimentos para soluções corporativas e com um compromisso profundo com o desenvolvimento de cada um de nós, desenvolvimento, enfim, humano.
Maravilha, Adri, exatamente isso. Esse é o nosso mais genuíno compromisso. E com isso, sabemos que temos muitos seguidores fiéis, mas também temos a alegria de receber novos rostinhos aqui. É crucial estabelecer conexões e construir confiança com todos vocês. Essa confiança começa quando nos abrimos e nos tornamos conhecidos. Portanto, vamos dar a vocês uma visão geral da Fellipelli, essa casa consultoria tão especial para nós, para fortalecer o nosso vínculo e solidificar a nossa confiança. A Fellipelli é hoje a maior empresa do Brasil especializada em instrumentos de diagnóstico comportamental. Com mais de 30 anos de história e experiência, temos orgulho de compartilhar alguns dos nossos marcos e dos nossos números aqui com vocês. Nós somos precursores e propagadores do neurocoaching no Brasil. É uma marca registrada na Fellipelli desde 2019. Representamos com exclusividade o MBTI aqui também no Brasil. Somos representantes da MHS, que é a empresa detentora do instrumento de inteligência emocional mais utilizado no mundo, que é o EQI 2.0. Mais de 6 mil horas de atendimento em processos de coaching com a metodologia do neurocoaching, da neurociência, mais de 1.000 profissionais formados em neurocoaching, mais de 100 equipes desenvolvidas através do nosso Team Coaching, mais de 21 mil palestras, 5 mil processos de Assessment Center já realizados, 600 mil aplicações de instrumentos de diagnóstico comportamental para exatamente aprofundar no que a gente acha que é tão importante, que é o autoconhecimento. O nosso portfólio hoje conta com mais de 38 instrumentos de diagnóstico e a nossa mais nova criação, o primeiro instrumento de diagnóstico comportamental com inteligência artificial, que é o Hype. E eu vou dar um spoiler, no último dia a gente vai ter um sorteio do Hype, uma cortesia para quem for beneficiado e conseguir preencher. Então fica com a gente até o final do evento, porque hoje, amanhã e quinta-feira tem muitas coisas legais para vocês. Então, pessoal, a gente conta com um sólido histórico para compartilhar com vocês serviços, produtos e conteúdos ricos e profundos.
Muito bom. Agora, né, que vocês podem já ver o que a gente está esperando aqui desse evento, né, vocês vão ter 3 noites, né, essa é a primeira noite, que eu espero que sejam noites espetaculares, com convidados especiais e uma estrutura, como eu falei, incrível aí dos nossos consultores e dos nossos parceiros que fizeram a gentileza de estar conosco nesses 3 dias, tá? Então, eu espero que vocês tenham grandes insights e reflexões que possam contribuir com o dia a dia de vocês no trabalho, na vida pessoal. E uma das coisas que, para quem trabalha aqui com neurociência e conhece o nosso trabalho, sabe que os insights, a gente pode perder ele de forma muito rápida. Por isso, a gente sugere que vocês anotem antes que eles sejam invadidos por outros pensamentos. Então, para abrir o nosso evento, hoje nós vamos ter o David Rock, que é a pessoa da qual eu admiro muito. Ele trabalha com neurociência e ele vai falar sobre neurociência da gestão das emoções. O David vai abordar sobre como as emoções surgem no nosso cérebro, baseado em evidências e pesquisas das formas mais efetivas e como que a gente pode gerenciar estas emoções. Então, a gente vai abrir esta palestra hoje colocando o David e logo depois perguntas para que vocês possam se comunicar e tirar todas as dúvidas com eles.
Perfeito. Então, como a Adri falou, aproveitem para vocês trazerem as perguntas, anotem ou já podem ir colocando ao vivo, online, on time aqui no nosso chat, que na hora certa que a gente for abrir esse espaço, a gente joga na tela para o David conseguir responder. Então, pessoal, queremos que vocês fiquem muito à vontade para tirar fotos, fazer prints, vídeos e compartilhar esse evento nas redes sociais de vocês. No Instagram, especialmente se vocês fizerem algum story ou algum post, não deixem de marcar a Fellipelli. Nosso Instagram, vocês devem saber, mas eu vou repetir, é @Fellipelli_, com 2 L's no meio e 2 L's no final. E a hashtag Fellipelli Neuro-IE, tá? Para a gente conseguir recompartilhar nas nossas redes também. Fiquem com a gente até o final, tá, pessoal? E todos os dias, ao final do evento, depois da série de perguntas, nós teremos um quiz. E especialmente esse ano, né, Dri? Os 2 primeiros lugares ganharão presentes muito especiais, que logo, logo vocês vão saber do que é.
Muito bom, Ale. Então, a gente preparou tudo com muito carinho e aproveitando todas as novidades da inteligência artificial, nós estamos hoje trazendo também uma experiência imersiva e tecnológica.
Maravilha, Adri. Temos uma previsão da gente se conectar com mais de 5.000 pessoas esse ano. Alguns de vocês estão ao vivo no nosso canal do YouTube, outros estão ao vivo através do nosso lobby digital que a gente desenvolveu com muito carinho para vocês. E esse lobby está bem legal. Vocês poderão encontrar várias informações sobre o evento, sobre a Fellipelli e ainda falar com o nosso time que está 100% conectado com vocês. Quem ainda não teve a oportunidade de visitar o nosso lobby, não se preocupe, ainda dá tempo, pois o nosso evento só termina no dia 5, quinta-feira. Então, vocês conseguem entrar, aqui embaixo deve estar aparecendo uma descrição no vídeo. Para quem está acompanhando através do YouTube, a descrição do vídeo vocês encontram o link para acesso a esse lobby, e os moderadores do nosso time também irão incluir aqui no chat. Vale a pena vocês darem uma conferida em tudo que a gente preparou por lá, viu?
Bom, e a gente não pode deixar, a gente está falando de inteligência artificial, está falando de inteligência emocional, então a gente não poderia deixar de usar, né, nesse evento também a inteligência artificial. Então, durante a palestra do David, vocês vão ver que estará disponível para todos vocês uma tecnologia de tradução simultânea de inglês para português, através da inteligência artificial. Assim, quando o David entrar, se vocês quiserem, vocês podem acompanhar e se sentir confortável. Se vocês puderem acompanhar em inglês, beleza. Se não, vocês vão poder ficar no áudio original ou com o áudio em português. Que é só ativar a tradução seguindo as orientações que estão ou no nosso chat, que a nossa equipe vai ajudar vocês, ou na descrição do vídeo, e os moderadores também vão nos ajudar a colocar vocês no chat, caso vocês precisem.
Perfeito, Dri. E como toda nova tecnologia, tudo bem a gente precisar de ajuda, mas a gente buscou um recurso que é super simples para vocês conseguirem realmente ativar essa tradução. Basta clicar no link, inserir no campo que vai estar escrito token a palavra Fellipelli, selecionar a função áudio e escolher a opção português. A gente recomenda que vocês desativem o áudio do vídeo da palestra e deixem ativado somente o áudio da inteligência artificial, para vocês poderem ouvir em português. Minimizem a tela da tradução para vocês terem uma melhor experiência vendo o David e ouvindo em português. E caso, de novo, a Adri falou, mas caso vocês precisem de qualquer auxílio, o nosso time está conectadíssimo aqui no chat durante todo o evento para apoiar no que for preciso. Pessoal, lembrando que essa tecnologia está disponível somente nos dias de hoje, porque quarta e quinta, amanhã e quinta, o evento inteiro vai acontecer em português.
Muito bom. Bom, então agora que todos os recados já foram dados, né, vamos falar um pouquinho sobre os nossos temas aqui. Então, a inteligência artificial, que ela envolve o uso da tecnologia para realizar várias tarefas que a gente sabe inteligentes, né? Algumas pessoas dizem, não, ela não é tão inteligente, o Nicoleles fala que sim, que não. Então, a gente sabe que tudo é ensinado, né, para que a inteligência artificial possa aprender e, na verdade, aprender com ela mesma, não é mesmo? Então, o que a gente precisa? Embora, muitas vezes, a inteligência artificial envolva um grau enorme de tecnologia, realizar algumas tarefas pela inteligência artificial não é tão simples assim, e acaba mexendo com muitas pessoas na nossa inteligência emocional, que aí se refere o quê? A nossa capacidade de entender e gerenciar nossas próprias emoções, não só lidando com a inteligência artificial, mas com várias situações que sejam independentes ou não da inteligência artificial. Então, conforme a inteligência artificial vai tomando, na verdade, presença cada vez mais na nossa vida, a gente percebe que cada vez mais as pessoas se sentem impactadas, inclusive nas suas emoções, por causa, às vezes, da falta de conhecimento, do conhecimento da inteligência artificial, mas não sabendo até onde ela vai. Então, a gente não é incomum a gente notar que várias pessoas estão ficando muito preocupadas. E aí, com seus empregos, preocupadas com a sua própria produtividade, como usar a inteligência artificial com a produtividade. Nós, da Fellipelli mesmo, estamos criando aqui aulas semanais para os nossos funcionários de como usar melhor a inteligência artificial em benefício da produtividade, da eficiência de cada um de nós, no dia a dia. Então, desmistificar a inteligência artificial é uma das coisas mais importantes para que a gente possa lidar cada vez melhor com elas e acalmar a nossa emoção, não é mesmo? Então, nessa edição, a gente vai abordar a inteligência artificial em conjunto com a inteligência emocional. A gente vai explorar cada uma dessas áreas para fornecer os melhores insights, para que a gente possa concatenar e usar esse conhecimento a nosso favor. Então, quanto mais a gente aprender e combinar esses dois conceitos, eu tenho certeza que vai nos ajudar a enfrentar tudo que o desafio desse futuro nos reserva. Então, sendo assim, eu queria apresentar para vocês como a neurociência explica o comportamento e as emoções frente aos estímulos deste século. Então, como as emoções surgem em nosso cérebro e quais são as formas mais eficazes da gente poder gerenciar. E para falar disso, a gente vai trazer o David Rock, que é uma pessoa que nós admiramos, porque nós representamos a empresa dele aqui desde 2009, aqui no Brasil. Então, o David Rock, ele é autor e consultor australiano, conhecido por vários trabalhos sobre neurociência e inteligência emocional, não, neurociência e liderança. Ele escreveu vários livros com vários tópicos. Um dos livros que muitas pessoas conhecem é aquele Your Brain Network, que é o seu cérebro no trabalho. Ele fala de estratégias para vencer a procrastinação, recuperar o foco, trabalhar de forma mais inteligente no nosso dia a dia. Ele também tem um livro que o nome é muito parecido, que é Your Brain Network, A New Science of Economics, que é o seu cérebro no trabalho, uma nova ciência da economia. Isso é importante, né, porque são dois muito parecidos. Um dos livros que a gente usa nas nossas formações aqui no Brasil, que é o Quiet Leadership, que é a liderança tranquila, que são os passos para transformar o desempenho no trabalho. Ele também tem um livro falando sobre coaching, coaching com o cérebro, usando de forma prática no dia a dia. E um dos modelos, né, que nós usamos também muito no nosso trabalho, é muito difundido, que é o SCARF, que é um modelo baseado no cérebro para colaborar e influenciar as outras pessoas. Então, com isso tudo, o David cunhou esse termo neuroliderança, e ele fundou o Neuroleadership Institute, que é uma consultoria de ciências cognitivas que assessorou mais de 60% das empresas da Fortune 100, né, a 100, e ele continua a moldar o caminho da NLI, trazendo neurocientistas, novas pesquisas, especializações e assessorando várias empresas e principalmente executivos do nível de C-Level. Então, o David, ele é conhecido e ele é citado na Harvard, ele é citado no New York Times, no Wall Street Journal, no Business Insider, na CNBC, na Forbes e muito mais. Em 2010, ele trouxe, como a gente falou, ele é australiano, ele trouxe o Neuroleadership para os Estados Unidos e fez a sede em Nova York. E o David também tem um doutorado em Middlesex University. E a partir de agora, então, eu vou começar a falar inglês, porque a gente vai receber o David aqui. Então, David.
Nice to see you, Adriana. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. Então, welcome to our event. We are very happy to have you participate with us this year. I've just told the audience a little about you and your talk, and I'm sure they are very eager to hear from you. Feel free to get started.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to spend this time with you and with everyone. I wish my Portuguese was better. I think I know a few hundred words so far. I've been working on it, but maybe I understand every 20 words. I understand. So I will speak in English, and maybe the technology will translate.
Yes, we are hoping so, because we put the artificial intelligence to help us.
Yeah, which is very interesting. Because I want to talk about human intelligence, which ironically is more important to understand if you're going to apply artificial intelligence. To successfully use artificial intelligence, you need to understand human intelligence much better. And currently, most people in the workplace have very poor understanding of human intelligence. So I'm going to talk about two big topics that I think are really central to the AI transformation that we'll go through. One is around the capacity that we have as humans to process information. So I'll talk about our overall capacity, and then I'll take some questions before we go to chapter 2. But the second chapter is we'll talk about motivation itself. So why people do what they do and how motivation works. And then we will also take questions. So we'll talk about two things that I think everyone in the workplace should understand better. That's human capacity to process information and human motivation to get people to do things. And if you understand those two things better, you can actually leverage AI much, much more effectively. So let's start with
David. I will leave you here in the stage, and Alessandra, we go to the backstage, and we come back when we are finishing.
Okay, very good. We'll see you soon. Obrigado.
Bye.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So let's maybe get my screen a little clean there as well. There we go. Let's start with capacity, and I want to help you understand our capacity overall to process information. We, as humans, we understand our capacity to process food very well. It's very obvious. We know that there's a certain amount of food that we should eat in a day. We can eat more than that, a little bit, not much more. We can eat less, but not much less. Generally, there's a certain amount of food we can eat in one day. We can't eat it all at once. We have to spread it out over the day. It doesn't have to be 3 meals, but it can't be all at once. And we can't eat, 3 or 4 days of food in one day. We have to eat every day. So our capacity to process food is very clear to us. It's every day, and it's spread across the day, and it's within a certain range, right? We can't eat an entire table full of food. So we're clear about that, but we're very unclear about our cognitive capacity or our mental capacity. We have no kind of understanding of how much we can process at any time. And we try to pack in so much into a brain that's already full. So I want to give you an understanding of our capacity so that you can more accurately leverage AI and also do work of any sort. So firstly, there's 2 types of processing in the human brain that happens, very simply: conscious processing and non-conscious processing. Now, conscious processing is something we're much more used to. That's making decisions and solving problems and planning and setting goals. All these things we do that are intentional. These use our conscious resources. But we also do things non-consciously, and that includes actually walking and understanding a language. If you're learning a new language, you see just how difficult it is if that's not unconscious. We talk using unconscious resources. We also solve difficult problems using unconscious resources without realizing that's what we do. So we have conscious and non-conscious problem solving. Now, the relationship between the two is very important. Conscious processing is very, very limited. And it's limited by what we call working memory capacity. So conscious processing involves solving problems, making decisions, comparing ideas, inhibiting responses, understanding ourselves, understanding other people, planning, goal setting. These conscious processes, if you could watch a brain doing that for, say, a minute, and then watch what happens in the brain unconsciously in that same minute, the relationship between the two is much, much bigger than most people realize. It's about a cubic meter compared to the Milky Way. In other words, if what happens in your brain consciously is a cubic meter, what happens in your brain unconsciously is trillions of times bigger, the Milky Way in size. And so it's very important to understand this and get the most from our non-conscious resources. I'll come back to that. But more importantly, we want to respect how limited our conscious resources are and respect those capacity limits. So what are they? What are these capacity limits of conscious processing? Let's understand them. Firstly, imagine that your ability firstly, conscious processing involves using what's called working memory. Working memory means you're holding something in your mind and doing something with it. So if you're just listening to me and not really thinking about what I'm saying, you're not really using working memory. But if you're listening to me right now and trying to follow along and make connections to these ideas, then you're holding these ideas in mind and using working memory. And think of this capacity as like a stage in a theater. And this stage is quite small, so much smaller than you might imagine a normal stage. In fact, it can only hold 3 or 4 people at a time. So a very small stage, and it's quite comfortable for 1 person. For 2 people, it's okay. For 3 people, it starts to be pretty squeezy. That's about as many as you want. And for 4 people, it's really a stretch. So it's a very small stage that starts, you put 5 people on it and 6 people on it, they start falling off. So it's a very small stage, and this stage takes a lot of light, a lot of power to actually operate. And the other thing with this stage is you can only have 1 act at a time. So if you have 3 characters on stage, you can only have 1 conversation between 1 character and the others. You can't have everyone talking at once. So the stage is small energy, and you can only do 1 thing at a time with this stage. And this is a really good metaphor for how we process information. And I'm sure you can relate to this. When you get a new idea, you have to work hard to hold it. If there's 4 or 5 different chunks or 4 or 5 parts of the idea, it's very hard to process. And we've all seen that even simple tasks like simple math tasks, we can only do that 1 at a time. It's not possible to add up 2 numbers and add up 2 other numbers at the same time. In the same way, you can't make 2 decisions at the same time. It's one after the other. So this capacity to make decisions and solve problems has a lot of limits. And it's the reason that everyone is so excited about AI, because AI has almost unlimited capacity to solve problems and make decisions and process information. You can take the entire legal system and put it into AI. literally thousands and thousands and thousands of books and articles and journals, more than you could just read in your entire life. You could take the entire system and AI can search through that in a fraction of a second, find not just one, but find lots of different ideas, connect them together and give them to you. So in some ways, AI is more like our unconscious brain in that it's trillions and trillions of times more powerful. But that makes it very important that we use it very well also. We have to be very thoughtful about what we plug into this brain. So we have a very limited capacity to process, and this tells you a couple of things. Firstly, it tells you that as we interface with AI, people themselves are going to be the bottleneck. Like people's ability to process what comes out of AI will actually be a bottleneck. Let me tell you a story about this. I've recently spent some time with a fascinating inventor who has invented a black box recorder like they have in airplanes. He invented a black box recorder for the operating theater in a hospital. So, on an airplane, they record everything that's happening. So if there's a crash or something goes wrong, they know exactly what everyone did, right? Exactly what happened with the buttons and levers and what people said and what they decided. Because plane crashes, when they happen, are terrible things and we should learn from them and improve. And that's been happening for decades, right? Anytime there's a crash, they learn and improve the systems. Now, operating theaters also have terrible tragedies that happen. And it turns out in North America, there are thousands and thousands of unnecessary deaths every year in the operating room. So this incredible inventor, who's one of the senior surgeons at Stanford Medical Center in the West Coast, he realized if we could just track everything that happened in an operating theater and study it, we could reduce the crashes, right? Reduce the mistakes that happen in hospitals. There are a lot of accidental, unintentional, avoidable errors in hospitals that add up to tens of thousands of deaths every year needlessly. And they're almost all human error. So anyway, he built this system. He's been working on this for actually nearly 20 years. I met with him recently, and he explained the technology. The technology itself is relatively easy. If you're a doctor or a nurse, you have some patches on you that collect essentially your heart rate and skin conductance, which tells you if you're anxious or not. It collects all the sounds happening. It collects video. It collects all this data. In fact, every day, the system is left on the whole time. And every day, over 1 million points of data are collected using fairly off-the-shelf technology. And that's pretty easy. So collecting and then storing data now is relatively inexpensive. Then they use AI to try to process this data every day. That's when things get hard. Finding insights in the data, much, much harder than collecting the data, right? So actually looking at the data and even using AI to find out like what really happened, that's much harder. But the really, really hard thing turns out to be getting people to change how they run the operating theater. So when they find insights in the data, the really hard thing is getting people to believe it and follow it and try new things and do things differently. Now, even with the challenges of that, they've been able to save about 2 lives a year so far in every theater that they have this in. And it's making a really big difference to everyone's ability to learn. But I think this is a fascinating story to understand the challenges ahead with AI. That AI might have this incredible ability to process information, but humans don't. And you've got to factor that in to your design of these kinds of initiatives. So capacity is something to really understand. And so that I don't tap out your capacity, I'll take questions in a few minutes about capacity before we go to chapter 2. But let's put aside conscious capacity for a minute. Let's talk about unconscious capacity in the human brain and how that works. So when you ask your brain a question, and you don't immediately get an answer, your brain keeps working on the problem. So if you say, oh, how can I, fit in seeing my friend tomorrow and get all my work done? And there's no obvious answer. Your brain keeps working on it. And they've actually seen that deep brain regions continue the thought process once you start. So what happens is when you ask that question, your brain goes through this deep search. It's a very deep search process. It's looking through every memory of every problem you've solved that's similar. It's looking through every book that you've read, every movie you've watched, every conversation you've had about similar kinds of challenges. There are literally trillions of different memories of different information, different connections in your brain that it's searching through. Now, the challenge is the information is probably stored in a small network. So if you remember solving a similar problem, it might have been a decade ago, and the neurons involved in that solution are a very small memory, a very subtle memory. What that means is there's not many neurons in the network of that memory. Now, everyday thought, like, how do I solve this problem? Everyday thought is millions or billions of neurons activated every second. Whereas the memory is only maybe tens or hundreds of neurons in a network. And what happens is you can only consciously notice something where the electrical activity of that something is above your current activity. Or let me explain that differently. Trying to recall a distant memory is like trying to hear a quiet cell phone at a loud party, maybe even a Brazilian party, very loud. So you have to turn down the party in order to hear the cell phone. And in a similar way, you have to turn down conscious processing and really everything in the brain to hear these quiet signals, because these subtle memories just literally don't have a lot of energy in them. Now, there's a whole lot of technical information I could explain, but let's just understand this basic idea that the unconscious brain is very, very, very efficient at solving problems, just like AI, incredibly efficient, but the signals are very, very, very quiet. So anything that you can do to make your brain quieter increases your ability to tap into this non-conscious intelligence that we have. So what does that look like in practice? Well, it turns out the quieter you are overall, the more insights you have. So by quiet, I mean like if you get up in the morning and turn your phone on straight away, your brain gets noisy, your working memory gets full of all these ideas, all these problems, and your brain works on them. So now your brain is noisy. If you get up in the morning and don't switch on your phone or laptop or the radio or television and just quietly walk around, quietly have a shower, maybe quietly make your breakfast, your brain will be much, much quieter, meaning there'll be a lot fewer electrical connections being made per second in your brain like that. So because your overall brain is quieter, you have more insights. Secondly, if you literally don't look, like if you look up when you're trying to solve a problem or close your eyes when you're trying to solve a problem, you're shutting down a lot of information that's being processed every second. So you've probably seen this when you ask a friend a hard question and then they stop listening to you. They look up or to the side, right? This means people are looking inside their thinking. They're looking into their working memory. They're activating their stage. So what happens when we look at the stage inside our brain, we stop processing outside information, and the brain overall can notice much more subtle signals. So the more quiet we are and the more internally focused we are, the more insights we have. The third function is actually being slightly positive in your approach. And the reason for that is being slightly negative is very noisy in the brain. So if I say, why can't I meet my friend and get my work done? That creates tension, anxiety. And that phrase, why can't I do this? Or why is this a problem? Creates a threat response in my brain, which is very noisy. Whereas if I say, what could I do differently to see my friend and get my work done? That doesn't create a threat response. Your brain will be quieter. So quiet, internally focused, slightly positive. And the fourth condition is interesting, is not trying to actively solve the problem. The fourth condition of insight is that you're not actively trying to solve the problem after you have failed already. So of course, the first time you try to solve a problem, try to solve the problem. But if you fail to solve it logically, and you now need your deeper brain to solve it, now you've got to stop trying the same wrong solutions. What we see is when people keep trying when they've failed, they essentially keep trying the wrong pathways. They keep trying the wrong directions. So these four principles are very, very, very helpful to understand, and they dramatically increase the chance of insight. Quiet, internally focused, slightly positive, not working directly on the problem. Right? These four conditions increase insight much more. Now, why does that matter? Well, because you're going to need a lot of insights if you're going to integrate AI. Right? Integrating AI into your work will not be done logically all the way. Right? There'll be some insights or some decisions you can make logically, but it's complicated. You're going to need to have really deep insights. And just like the operating theater, collecting the data isn't so hard. It's actually having the insights from this massive data that's really important. So to summarize this kind of first piece, to integrate AI, we actually need to understand human capacity much better. Firstly, to essentially make it easy for our limited brain to understand things. That means simplify things, right? Don't use your brain to store information. Use it to process information. Don't fill your stage with ideas, right? Put ideas on a whiteboard or on a screen and use your stage to process, not store, right? So we want to minimize the effort on the capacity we have consciously. And we want to maximize the insights that we have about AI itself and about everything that we're doing. So these two insights about capacity are really important, and they're really foundational if you're going to use AI. If you're going to use AI to improve a sales process, for example, you want to understand the places that you can really accelerate, the points at which our capacity falls down, right? Do you want to accelerate finding leads? Do you want to accelerate getting information about leads? Do you want to accelerate how you have the conversation? Do you want to accelerate the follow-up? Which part of the process can you accelerate? And what are the limits of the brain that are holding you back from doing that? These are the big questions to think about and hopefully have some insights about there. So let me pause there. We're going to go into chapter 2 in a few minutes, but this is a good time for any questions, also any reflections you might have, like any insights you might be having about AI and about the human brain. Take a moment to put any questions or reflections in the chat there, and my team will share those to me as we go. I can see some in the chat there. I can see some questions already. Let's have a look. Thanks, Adrian. So, is it true that idle people have the best ideas? It's interesting. Every August for the last 10 years, I've had what I call halftime August, where I have a long weekend, Friday and Monday, all of August in the northern summer. So you would do this in January, like where I'm from. But in the northern summer, every August, I take Friday and Monday off, and I only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think of that as halftime. And what I find is I have my biggest and best ideas that often impact the whole year during that month when I'm not working. And the 4 days of just not trying to do anything are tremendously helpful for making deeper connections. So what we see is that we're filling our brain with like activity all the time, right? These devices keep us very busy, keep our brains full. It is true that we have a lot more insights when the brain is quiet. when we're actually not trying to solve a problem. Do a little experiment. Maybe you have a favorite word game, like where you have to find a word in like a crossword. When you get stuck, go and do something quiet for a few minutes and see what happens when you come back a few minutes later, rather than continuing to try. And you'll see that if you have a rest and let your brain rest and do something quiet, not something activating, just something quiet, you'll find you'll have a lot more insights all of a sudden. Okay, very good. So another question from Mila. So when is the best time to make difficult decisions? So we actually have a pretty strong point of view on that. The answer is the morning. We should make difficult decisions in the morning before we fill our brain with things, before we check emails, before we look at social media. We should make our difficult decisions, our biggest decisions, and do our hardest work first thing in the morning. That's when you'll think much more clearly, much more deeply, and you'll have a lot more insights. So we actually developed this concept called minimal meeting mornings during the pandemic, minimal meeting mornings and minimal meeting Mondays, so that time could be used. Because also on Monday, after a rest, you'll make a lot better decisions as well. Very good. Let's go to another question. See if there's any other questions there. It's interesting question. Thanks, Midori. You don't give much space for meditation practice. Shouldn't we include it about getting more insights when we're quiet? So very interesting. Meditation is a bit like saying exercise. It comes in many shapes and sizes and different practices. But if we focus on one form of meditation, say mindfulness practice, which is essentially noticing your breath and accepting whatever's coming, and then putting your attention back to your breath. Right. So that kind of mindfulness practice, it's actually a very active practice. So you're overall quietening the brain, but you will get insights as a result of that. But it's a complicated situation, because while you're meditating, you're actually focused. You're not unfocused. And insights actually come from being unfocused. In fact, one of the scientists who study insight, Mark Beeman, tested this. He found that monks who had 10,000 hours of meditation practice or more, when they came into the lab and tried to have insights, he found they had very few, because they were very good at being focused on meditation. And you actually have insights in this unfocused state that's called mind wandering. So mind wandering is more like how you feel when you first wake up in the morning. You're not thinking anything, but your brain's just processing things effortlessly. So that state of just kind of letting your mind wander where it goes will increase insight. But that's not meditation. Meditation is actually focusing on your breath, focusing on information in the present. It so happens that quiets your brain overall, so you accidentally have insights. So what I might say is meditate for a while to quieten your brain, or go for a run to quiet your brain, or do some yoga to quiet your brain. But do something that quiets your brain. Then do some mind wandering. Mind wandering is where you let your brain just do its own thing, being very un-goal focused, right? Take a walk, do some exercise, drift off to sleep, let yourself have a nap. That's where you'll actually have the most insights, as it turns out. So I'm not against meditation in any way. I think it's phenomenal, fantastic brain training. But the best way to get insights turns out to be from mind wandering, not meditation itself. Let's take one more question and then we'll go on. Thank you, Denise. Nice to see you. Can AI surpass our processing capacity? AI has massively surpassed our processing capacity already. Massively surpassed. Now, it hasn't in certain domains. It's not surpassed our capacity to understand human emotions yet. It probably will in the next year or two. It's not surpassed our capacity to do a lot of things yet, but it probably will. And essentially, the reason it can do that is that the computing power is just dramatically more than our conscious resources have. So our conscious resources are very limited. How much we can hold in mind at one time is very, very limited. You can't look at a string of 100 numbers in random order and look at that for a fraction of a second and remember it. Whereas AI absolutely can immediately. So in fact, you can make it 1 million numbers. In fact, maybe 1 billion numbers. In a fraction of a second, it'll remember that. So the processing capacity of AI is extraordinarily bigger. So it is going to surpass human abilities in probably just about every domain. The issue is that humans are the gatekeeper of what we do with that. And remember, our conscious capacity is very limited. So it's going to be an incredibly interesting time to be alive and to see how AI gets used, because humans will make the decision about how AI gets used. But AI is much smarter than us in so many ways. So it's going to be a really, really interesting time. And yeah, partially it's because AI doesn't care about noise and doesn't care about all of that. I think that's a great segue. Thanks, Denise. It's a great segue to chapter 2 around motivation. Let's go to motivation, and we'll talk about kind of why people do what they do. And I'm just making a note to the operator. So let's talk about motivation. So Denise is right. One of many reasons AI is more effective than humans is it doesn't have the noise, and it doesn't really have any motivations. It doesn't have a desire to do more of something or less of something. It just processes information. Humans have an automatic reaction to everything that we see or hear or feel or taste or sense or sit on or stand on or smell, everything. We have an automatic unconscious reaction to every single stimuli that comes to us, internal and external. Now, what is that reaction? That reaction is designed to keep us alive and basically to keep us away from danger. So we have this automatic reaction to everything that firstly is avoid danger, right? Avoid anything bad, stay away from any kind of threat. And the second thing that the brain does is it tries to help us have more of the good things, right? So if you're walking down a street and there's a bad smell from one side of the street, you're in the middle of the street, there's a bad smell on one side and a nice smell on the other. Maybe there's a bakery on the right and there's a garbage heap on the left. You will steer towards the bakery without even knowing it, unconsciously. If you're on the phone and not even paying attention, you'll just find yourself steering towards the bakery and away from the bad smell. So we are unconsciously built to move away from any kind of negative, dangerous, difficult, harmful situation and move toward anything that might be good for us. Now, this response is very important to understand. If you're making notes, draw a horizontal line with an arrow at each end and put toward on the right and away on the left, right? Toward on the right, away on the left. So the brain has this reaction to everything that we notice or even unconsciously notice, which is go toward or move away. And these are motivations, right? Motivation means to move. We are driven to move away from bad things and toward good things. So all human motivation is one of those two flavors, right? All human motivation is approach or avoid, right? Is more or less, toward or away. All human motivation. And in fact, we have this reaction every single second, about 5 times every single second. It's fascinating. So motivation is in these two different flavors, but they're not equal, right? So if you walk down the street and there's no bakery, there's just a garbage dump, right? You will move to the right pretty quickly. If there was just a bakery, you would still move to the right, but much less quickly. Well, let me explain that differently. If you're in a scanner that's watching your brain signals, if you're in an fMRI machine watching your brain signals, and you see an angry face on screen, lots and lots of your brain lights up with a threat response. So when you see an angry face on a screen in front of you and they're reading your brain, you get activation of many, many different parts of the brain, including the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the language centers, many, many other centers of the brain all light up. Now, they light up really quickly and really intensely, right? In a similar way, if you're driving and you go to overtake a car and suddenly you see another car coming your direction, you immediately act before you are even aware that you're acting. It's very, very rapid, right? Or if you're walking in the woods and you see a snake, before you even consciously know it's a snake, you've stopped in your tracks. You have unconsciously seen the snake and stopped before you even consciously see it. So we take very strong action very quickly to danger, because if we miss danger, we might, it might be very bad. Whereas with opportunities, we take more considered, thoughtful responses. It's much less of an intense response. So this is a long way of saying bad is stronger than good. In the brain, bad is stronger than good. The challenge is that when we have a threat response, like to that snake or that garbage dump, it does something to our capacity. In fact, the threat response in particular, which remember is strong, the threat response and capacity are in a seesaw. So with the exception of a little bit of threat, which can be good for focus, anything more than a little bit of threat significantly reduces our conscious capacity and even more significantly reduces our ability to have insights. So even a little bit of threat, so let me start again. A little bit of threat can help us focus, but reduces creativity a lot. But anything more than a little bit of threat really significantly reduces conscious and non-conscious processing. So back to Denise's point, we get a little bit of noise in our system in the form of anxiety or stress or danger. Our ability to process really goes down. So motivation, in large part, motivation is about avoiding danger, avoiding threats, avoiding negative things. That's what motivates us the strongest, the fastest, the easiest, right? If you want someone to do something, it seems obvious that we threat, we give them a threat. We say, if you don't fix this, you're fired. Or if you don't fix this, you're going to lose your bonus. If you don't fix this, I'm going to be mad at you. We threaten to get people to pay attention. But that threat comes at a cost. It's not just that the resources drop. People literally make more mistakes as a result of that threat. They become less creative, less collaborative, and even have some poor health outcomes. So managing with a threat response is not a good way to manage, particularly if you are someone's boss. You already create a threat response just by being their boss, right? Just by being someone's manager, you put that employee in a threat state already. So if you add threat to threat, it makes it all much, much worse. We spiral down. Whereas what we should do if we're managing people is add reward to threat, right? If you're managing someone, you need them to do something, you want to send positive signals. You want to create a toward state, because that toward state actually opens up their brain. Now you can create that toward state by aligning on goals together. If you have shared goals, right, people are in a toward state. By rewarding people, by giving people the possibility of rewards, by creating expectations, by creating all sorts of understanding of what's happening. So there are lots of ways to do this, but essentially, if you're a manager and you're listening to this, understand that you create threats before you say anything, and that this makes people less effective in their job. And what we want to do is create more, send more of these positive signals as much as we can. So now let's go one click deeper into motivation. What creates the strongest threats and the strongest rewards? Well, you'd have to say anything that relates to our survival, right? So if you see a snake, it's very immediate, right? You see a car coming at you, very immediate, very strong threat. So anything that relates to our survival is a strong threat or reward. So physical pain is about survival. So physical pain is a strong threat, right? If you're in pain, it's very hard to focus. I'm sure you understand if you're in pain right now, if you have a headache, it will be very hard to follow everything I'm saying. Your mind will get distracted by the pain, right? And it reduces your capacity. It reduces the stage. So what creates these threats and rewards? It's things that are about survival. Well, how do we survive as humans for the first part of our life? Like when we're born, how do we survive? Do we survive by finding food, in the wild? If we did, we might be very motivated by smell, like a wolf might be. But we don't. We don't survive by finding food in the wild. We don't survive by sensing danger from predators. So our sense of hearing is not as good as many other animals. We survive by understanding other humans. We literally need at least 10 years of being supported by other humans before we can survive alone. And most people would not survive alone after 10 years. So it's 10 to 15 years even before you could survive alone. So the way humans are built is that the things that create strong threats and rewards are social issues, because that's basically our survival. And these social issues activate very similar networks in the brain as physical pain, because these social issues are also central to our survival. If you were in a tribe of 50 people, and millions of years ago, if you were in a tribe of 50 people, and the tribe decided that you were not worthy of being in that tribe anymore, you would die, right? You needed each other to survive. So you needed to find ways to stay in good standing with that tribe. You needed to stay popular in that tribe. You needed to know who to trust in that tribe, right? To stay alive, you needed very good social muscles, very good social circuits in the brain. And so that's how we've been built. So about 15 years ago now, a long time ago, 2008, I published a framework that explains all that in one word that breaks into 5 words. And some of you will have heard of this. It's called the SCARF model, SCARF. I'll explain it. But SCARF describes the 5 things that your brain does to keep you away from danger and toward opportunity. And this framework is very, very important if you're trying to integrate AI, because you will create social threats when you actually try to integrate AI. You're going to make people feel treated unfairly and feel like all sorts of things will happen. So it's very, very helpful to understand human motivation if you're going to integrate AI, overall. So what does SCARF stand for? Status, which is you compared to other people. Certainty, which is just how we can predict what's happening. Autonomy, which is a feeling of being in control or having choices. Relatedness, which is a feeling of having shared goals or of being on the same team. And then fairness, which is a sense of being treated equally as others. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These 5 domains are really important to human experience and really make a difference to our moment-to-moment experience, every waking moment that we're alive. So, how does this work? You go to a meeting and someone says, I didn't like your idea from the last meeting. That's a status attack, right? If they also don't tell you which idea, it's now very uncertain, right? If they also don't give you any chance to respond, you have no control. And if you thought this person was on your side before and now they're attacking you, now you have a relatedness threat. And if it all feels unfair, now you have the negative jackpot. You have the jackpot of threat. So all 5 domains of SCARF in threat are a real problem. This happened, by the way, early in the pandemic in 2020, June 2020. People were very raw from the pandemic, very low certainty, very low autonomy, very low relatedness. And suddenly there was this huge wave of unfairness that happened June 2020, particularly in North America, around the racial crisis, around everything that happened at that time. And suddenly people added fairness, like a huge fairness reaction and a huge status reaction to a big drop in certainty, autonomy, and relatedness. And people went from not opening their front door to screaming in the streets in a march with millions of others because it was such an overwhelming threat response. And so one of the ways to understand SCARF is that these motivations essentially make each other worse, right? So if you attack someone's status, but do it unfairly, it's much worse than attacking their status and explaining why you're doing it. So what happens is it's a seesaw, right? It's not an even seesaw though, because if you say that was a dumb idea, but you look great today, it doesn't balance out, right? The threat is bigger. So it's not an even seesaw because the threat is bigger than the reward. But if you're going to, put a status threat on someone, you might need a certainty reward, an autonomy reward, a relatedness reward. You might need to balance it out in multiple ways. Now, guess what AI is right now? AI is a huge certainty threat to people. Makes no sense, really complicated. It's also a big potential drop in autonomy and people feeling like they have no control, right? So you've got 2 threats there. Maybe it feels really unfair as well. So now you've got a big fairness reaction. So as you're introducing AI in different ways, we're all going to have these reactions. And if you're trying to use it thoughtfully, you're going to have to be really careful with how you do that. So SCARF is a way of understanding why people do what they do. It's the primary colors of motivation. It's also the primary colors of belonging, inclusion, psychological safety, engagement, and a number of other things. It's literally what our brain does when we interact with others. And with this understanding, with SCARF as an understanding, we can better predict ahead of time what could happen when we launch AI, what could happen when we give feedback, what could happen when we run a meeting differently, right? It's a way of thinking about our interactions more effectively. So let me pause there and we'll take some questions. I think I've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. But just to summarize, capacity, while you think of your questions, capacity is very limited, and any noise in the brain from a threat response reduces conscious capacity and reduces insight capacity even more, right? So both conscious and non-conscious processing is really reduced by a threat response, right? And certainty is one of the things that creates threat, or uncertainty creates a lot of threat, as well as the other domains of SCARF. So this gives us a way. This gives us a way of understanding human motivation as it relates to AI in a whole different way. So let's take some questions. Also, any insights you might be having are interesting to comment on as well. See what questions come in. Give you a moment to put some questions in. There's a few questions coming in. How to ensure human connections in a work team in a world dominated by AI? Thank you, Maria Lucia. I think it's going to be a really interesting time. You remember when we first, in the pandemic, when we first had to all go online? Maybe it didn't happen in Brazil so much, or Florida, but in many places we all had to go online a lot. And it suddenly felt very disconnected, very inhuman. What's interesting is we balanced that out by being more vulnerable and more real and more honest for a long time. And we were raw. We were much more raw on camera with each other than we might have been in person. Now, of course, we were all experiencing very raw emotions. But in a world where suddenly our interactions were not so human, we compensated for that by being more human in that platform. And I think a similar thing is going to happen. We're going to know when we're interacting with an AI. Like I can tell when I get, a response from a question to a customer service. I can tell when it's AI, and I just get annoyed. Whereas I can tell when something's from a human, and I seem to care more and I pay more attention. So, certainly getting technology fixed through AI might be great, but getting a quick answer through AI can be really helpful. But I think the human interactions will be appreciated more because they are with humans. So I'm hopeful about that overall. That I think it will have an interesting and unexpected effect on our human interactions. It's a great question. Thanks, Katima. So I believe that when we generate a culture that mitigates the perception of threats, people are more able to have discretionary energy. Are they more accountable? Yes. So interesting question. The concept of psychological safety is a really interesting concept. We have been working with that idea for a long time. And in the last year, we partnered with Amy Edmondson to release a whole approach to psychological safety. But psychological safety doesn't mean that people have no perception of threat. It actually means they have very low social threat. But the threats of generally doing work might be quite high. Social threats, remember, are very painful. Feeling like someone is unpredictable with you is very difficult. Feeling like you can't trust someone, very difficult. Feeling like someone could attack you at any moment is very, very complicated. These things take over our brain. Feeling like you can't trust someone makes it very hard to work with someone. So those are social threats. But the idea of psychological safety is you might be doing really difficult things that have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of difficulty in them. And you might be anxious about that, but there's very low social threat. You know that people have your back. You know that you can make mistakes and they'll be okay. You know that you can count on people to support you and help you. So it's the excuse me, the low perception of social threats, I think, is really important, not the low perception of overall threats. And the other thing is, the best work teams actually argue quite a bit, but no one takes it personally. In fact, they might joke with it, they might do it lightly, but they're arguing, they're debating, they're pushing back, they're speaking up, right? The best teams actually argue quite a bit, and people are quite feisty with each other. But at the end of the day, literally at the end of each day, people don't go home with any resentment because there was no social threat there. So just to put some nuance on that, it's not the absence of threat that will make people have more accountability. It's the absence of social threat. I think that's an important distinction there. Thank you for that question. I've got time for a couple more as it relates to AI, or just as it relates to capacity and motivation. Thanks, Sergio. Would I agree AI is merely a Q&A session and the answers depend on how it's programmed? I mean, yes and no. There's some really, really powerful things you can do with AI now that are quite extraordinary. I mean, the operating theater example is one. AI can see a pattern. AI can see a pattern in when mistakes happen. For example, in the operating theater, they can see that they happen when people are experiencing high threats, but they can see who's experiencing high threats, which type of person, and how high and for how long. So it can study, all the thousands of mistakes that happen, little mistakes, right? It can study all of them and collect all this data in a way that no human could possibly do, and then show you patterns, and show you patterns that no human could ever find because we just can't process that. So you're not actually programming it; you're giving it huge amounts of data to actually learn from. So I think in some ways it's just a basic Q&A architecture, but in other ways it is a type of intelligence. in that you can feed in huge amounts of data and it will find patterns that no human can find. In some ways, it's kind of an alien intelligence. I think it's a little bit like an alien intelligence, in that it kind of is like a, and this is maybe very controversial, but it kind of is like a life form. Like my theory is that AI has read everything that humans have published, and it's taken on human traits. It notices that humans make things up. And so AI has been making things up, right? This whole thing about hallucinations, it got that from humans because humans also make things up. And it would have noticed that there are real discrepancies in everything that humans say and do. So it's noticed patterns in how humans communicate and interact and taken on some of those unfortunate capacities. So it is a type of intelligence. It's not just artificial intelligence. You could say it's almost like an alien intelligence in that it is taking on qualities that are far beyond just answering questions. Thank you. So another question. Thank you, Karim. Do you suggest any strategy for leaders to become more aware of their threatenings pattern if they're threatening their teams? Yeah, so I published a paper on SCARF in 2006, I think. No, 2008, called Managing with the Brain in Mind. And you can still find it online, Managing with the Brain in Mind. And a CEO wrote to me. She was the CEO of Dun & Bradstreet at the time, the company that rates other companies. And she said, I want to meet with you. I want to talk about this. This is really important. So I went out to see her, and I thought we were going to have half an hour. And 2 hours later, we realized we had a lot more to talk about. And we ended up talking a lot for some years, and fascinating woman. So this woman, she basically said to me, she never understood why people would get anxious in her meetings. And she said, I would always challenge people when they had an idea. I would challenge them, in the meeting to explain their rationale, and people would just somehow go quiet. And she said, I would push back on their ideas and tell people where they were wrong. And I never understood why this was an issue. And she read this article about SCARF, and she had a horrible realization that she was literally making everyone less intelligent by creating threats. And what she didn't realize was that she was literally the smartest person in that room. She was very, very, very smart. One of the smartest people I've ever met. She was always the smartest person in that room. Firstly, her raw intelligence was just better than everyone. She was faster than everyone, but she also understood the business better than everyone. So in 3 different ways, she was always just much, much higher status than everyone in the room. And if a higher status person attacks a lower status person, they find it very, very, very painful. And so she changed her whole style. Her name's Sarah Matthew. She went on the next year to become the highest revenue generating CEO of the Fortune 500, that measured by outside people. She generated more value in her company that next year than any other CEO in the Fortune 500. And she attributes it to completely changing her style, to minimizing the threats when she interacted with her people. So, the way she did it is she understood SCARF, and she started to really pay attention to minimizing the threats and avoiding creating strong threats. So what does that look like? Asking more questions, creating more certainty, giving people more options, really being thoughtful about fairness. So overall, really supporting her team to stay in that towards state. And particularly if you're very smart and very driven, you will accidentally create lots of threats in your people. So whether you're a first-time manager or a CEO, be thoughtful about people's reactions to everything you do and try to minimize those threats using SCARF as a guide. Great question. Thank you. Got a time for maybe one more, then I'll need to wrap up and hand back. Thanks, Carla. So self-knowledge and motivation on emotional intelligence. How trust in AI can influence psychological safety, the processing. Interesting. I mean, I think AI can help with burnout. I think AI can help with time management. The question's going to be, will we trust what AI tells us? And also, will we change? But I see, like Microsoft has a system called Copilot, which is, at the moment is helping people with coding and with some basic tasks. But that kind of system, that kind of Copilot, is going to get smarter and smarter and smarter very, very quickly. And it's going to be able to tell us better ways of managing our time, better ways of preventing burnout. The question is, will we listen? Right? I don't know if you remember Clippy from Microsoft. Years ago, there was a little icon called Clippy, and it was a disaster. No one liked being interrupted. So again, we go back to capacity issues. These tools might really help us, but will we actually trust these things? I think is a really interesting question. All right, very good. One more question, and then I'll hand back to the team, maybe with some closing comments. Any other questions there? Thank you, Denise. If we are highly happy, we lose focus as well. Do we have insights? Interestingly, so being really happy is actually noisy in the brain. Being really excited is very noisy. If you've ever gone to a conference with lots of fascinating ideas, like a TED conference or just a great conference, if you go to that conference, you have all these new ideas, you get really excited, you find it's very hard to focus. Right? If you try to sit down and write an email, it's very hard to focus. So you've got too much noise in the brain that happens to be positive. Now, it's harder to get a lot of positive noise than negative noise. Right? Much easier to get negative noise. Just imagine, missing a deadline and you get too much negative noise for insights. But you've got to have a lot of positive for the same. So really, the most powerful way to have insights is actually being unfocused. So you're not focused on happy things. You're not focused on sad things. You're not trying to do anything. You're unfocused. So you're taking a walk and you're just letting your mind wander. Or you're having a shower. Maybe your eyes are closed and you're just letting your mind wander. You're not trying to do anything at all. The more you just let your mind wander in not a happy way or an anxious way, the more you just let your mind wander, the more insights that you'll have. It's a really, really clear relationship between those two things. A couple of practices I'd recommend. Leave your Monday mornings open for insight work. Leave your Monday mornings after a weekend open. Plug a simple question into your brain, like, how do I get more organized? Or how do I get more motivated? Or how do I increase my revenue? How do I find more customers? Plug a simple question in your brain and let your mind wander. Take a walk, have a cup of tea, do something pleasant, watch a funny video, like do something that just makes you slightly happy, not too happy, slightly happy to remove the anxiety and let your mind wander. So plug a simple question in, let your mind wander. Much more effective for solving really complex problems than trying. But it's not about being too happy, not about being anxious. It's actually about simple question and then let your mind wander. You'll have a lot more insights. Perhaps you can ask a question like, how am I going to leverage AI most effectively in moving forward? So let me summarize, and then I'll hand back to the team. As we get this incredible resource called AI, and I think AI will be much more impactful than the internet, which is really saying something. I think AI will change how we do things even more than the internet has. It might take 3 to 5 years, but it will do. But as we integrate AI, we have to deal with human capacity limitations. Right? Humans will be the ones, applying that AI, digesting it, using it, etc. So we need to understand our capacity limitations and know how to have more insights to solve really complex problems. And secondly, we're going to need to watch out for the threat responses that happen as people have these AI experiences. We're going to need to watch out for the uncertainty, the lack of control, the unfairness people will feel as AI starts to come in. And we'll need to create more positive experiences to balance these out. So I think it's a tremendous time to be thinking about humans, a tremendous time to be thinking about human capacities as we think about leveraging those capacities with some remarkable technology. Now is the most important time to understand our humanness so that we can accelerate it as effectively as we can. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share all this. I'll hand back to you, Adriana, and really appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone. And maybe this time next year, I'll have some Portuguese better, and I can say a sentence or two even in Portuguese. Obrigado. Muito obrigado.
Adri, você está no mudo.
Okay. Thank you. We are happy because the artificial intelligence works very well.
Really? I'm so surprised.
Really, yes. And I believe everybody can follow what you are explaining. And really, thank you for coming and the excellent talk.
Thank you very much. I'm so curious if people could comment in the chat, how clear was this in through the translation? Was this very
yes, I try it, and we can choose an audio or subtitle. It's amazing.
Subtitle, yeah.
You can choose, and it works very, very well.
Wow, I kind of want to see translated to English and then translated back to Portuguese and then translated to, I want to see what happens if you translate it 2 times and if it comes back clearly.
Yes, because I am understanding what you are saying. So I'm following in Portuguese and I said, wow, it's amazing.
Very clear, Denise is saying. Thanks very much for those comments. Excellent. Well,
Yes.
take care of your brain, everyone. It's very important. We only have one. And the more insights that you have, the more energized you will be. Insights are fantastic when you're tired, exhausted, burnt out. Insights create energy. They are the source of engagement. Most companies start with an insight. Right? I was recently with Honda, and the whole of Honda, the motorcycle company, the whole of Honda started because in the 1950s, a Japanese man saw his wife struggling to bring shopping home on a bicycle. And there were all these engines lying around from the Second World War. And he said, I'm going to put an engine on a bicycle so my wife can bring home shopping easier. And that was the invention of the motorcycle and the whole company called Honda. It all started with an insight. So insights start companies. Insights engage. Insights will be really important as we move into the world of AI. So thank you very much. Bless you for the opportunity. Look forward to being back in Brazil sometime. There's a rumor that I might be there for New Year's, so maybe we'll get to see you.
Okay, great
In
news.
January. We'll do my best.
Thank you so much for many insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, Adriana,
Thank you.
and everyone.
Thank
there.
you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Okay,
David.
bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Bom, Ale, foi maravilhoso. Que bom que aprendemos e usamos nosso cérebro aqui para muitos insights e muitos aprendizados. Então, agora é com você aí para você falar das últimas informações.
Maravilha! A palestra do David foi realmente incrível, provocativa e vários insights. A gente teve uma oportunidade com ele, Adri, há uns anos atrás, que ele falou sobre os níveis de insight. Tive alguns números 5 por aqui, que é super legal também. Mas agora, Adri, chegou a hora do nosso quiz. Quem ficou com a gente até agora tem uma ótima oportunidade de ser super beneficiado com uma das nossas formações ou um livro, porque esse ano, exclusivamente, a gente vai premiar as 2 primeiras pessoas que ganharem esse quiz. Lembrando, pessoal, que tempo conta e, claro, a resposta certa. Então, sejamos rápidos aí no gatilho para ver o que vai acontecer. Imagino que o QR Code já esteja na tela. Eu vou colocar aqui e compartilhar com vocês. A gente já tem pessoas entrando, isso é ótimo. Deixa eu só ajustar aqui. Peraí, pessoal. Deixa eu voltar aqui. Eu preciso compartilhar primeiro. Eu vou compartilhar enquanto as pessoas vão acessando. Deixa eu colocar aqui. Compartilhar a minha tela. Eu acho que já começou. Deixa eu ver aqui o que aconteceu. Aí, pessoal, eu vou começar de novo. Deixa eu só ver como é que faz. Pronto, a gente já... Deixa eu ver se eu consigo resetar aqui. Vou pedir para vocês começarem novamente, porque... Ó, eu vou fechar a votação e eu vou começar de novo. Porque não deu tempo de todo mundo entrar. Só um minutinho, pessoal. Vou voltar aqui. Pronto. A gente tem aqui algumas pessoas, eu não estou conseguindo voltar. Eu dei pouco tempo, porque a gente sempre espera um minutinho. Mas apertei aqui, concluiu. Algumas pessoas conseguiram entrar. Vamos aqui para a segunda pergunta, então. Mais gente entrou. Pergunta 2. Vou esperar mais gente chegar. Muito bom. Vou esperar mais 30 segundinhos, porque a gente tem um delay também de quem está no YouTube para quem está na plataforma. Muito bom. Vamos ver quem vai mais rápido para ter mais pontos. Tudo que é feito na vida se baseia na determinação que o seu cérebro tem em minimizar o perigo e maximizar a recompensa. De quem é essa frase, pessoal? Acho que a gente ouviu ela hoje, né, Dri? Muito bom, Dr. David Rock, maravilha. Vamos para a nossa terceira pergunta. Temos aqui bastante jogadores. Então, vamos lá. Quem responde certo e mais rápido ganha. É praticamente impossível apagar um circuito cerebral, porém, pode ser fácil criar um novo. Vocês acham que isso é verdadeiro ou falso? Tem mais alguns segundos para vocês preencherem. Todo mundo votou. E a nossa resposta é verdadeira. Vamos ver quem foi. A gente tem, pessoal, esse ano, como eu falei para vocês, o primeiro e o segundo lugar. Então, nós temos Caleb. Primeiro lugar, você ganhou uma vaga na nossa formação BBCS. E Denise, acredito que seja Denise Manfred, que estava interagindo com a gente no chat também, ganhou o livro Liderança Tranquila. Não diga aos outros o que fazer, ensine-os a pensar. E aí, pessoal, vou pedir para vocês aqui, o Caleb em primeiro lugar e a Denise, confirmem para a gente aqui, para que a gente possa direcionar os prêmios e falar com vocês. Coloquem aqui no chat o nome completo de vocês, o e-mail e o @ do Instagram, para que o nosso time possa procurar vocês para falar sobre a entrega dos prêmios, a inscrição e tudo mais. Pessoal, esse foi o nosso primeiro dia de evento e chegou ao final. Poxa, passou super rápido, também achei. E eu gostaria de agradecer a participação de todos e continuem com a gente nos próximos 2 dias. Não deixem de participar e aproveitem das premiações. David, imagino que já deve ter se desconectado, mas maravilhoso ter você conosco, muitos insights e maravilhosas ideias compartilhadas. Amanhã, pessoal, teremos o Flávio Maneira falando sobre neurociência e um olhar para o futuro, uma interface entre nós, humanos, e os sistemas cognitivos. Vocês não podem perder. Nos vemos amanhã às 19 horas. Tchau, tchau!